Now, speaking of competition, let's look at geopolitical contests, fights for influence in a remote battleground, the Solomon Islands. The Solomon Islands went to polls last week. We told you about this on the show, about how China was on the ballot there because their elections were partly about that, about China's growing influence on the islands. Well, the people have voted, and a sizable number seem to have rejected Beijing. The pro-China Prime Minister Manasseh Sogavare is on the back foot. He barely held on to the constituency, his own constituency, and he doesn't have the numbers to return to power. Here's our report.
The Solomon Islands held their general election last week, on April 17th. The election was closely watched by countries around the world because it was seen as a referendum on China. The Solomon Islands is an independent nation located in the Pacific Ocean, close to Australia. Australia has traditionally been their closest ally and partner, but that changed in the last few years, all thanks to this man, Manasseh Sogavare. Sogavare became Prime Minister in April 2019, and he spent his tenure changing his country's diplomatic policy. In September 2019, just months after taking power, he made his first big move. He severed diplomatic relations with Taiwan. Instead, he chose to ally himself with Beijing. That's when China started making inroads in the Solomon Islands. It culminated with a security pact in 2022, a secret pact which gives China unknown levels of influence in the Solomon Islands. Last week's election was the first since this shift in policy, so it was seen as a litmus test. A test of China's and the pro-China Sogavare's popularity. The result has been a mixed bag. Sogavare has not returned as Prime Minister. Well, not yet anyway. His party didn't win enough seats for that. In fact, he barely retained his own constituency. That too by the narrowest of margins. These are Sogavare's own words. He said this in an interview with a local news outlet. But despite the close call, Sogavare is defiant. He says the result is a blow to the West, which means it's also a victory for his backers in Beijing. It seems China avoided an embarrassing defeat in the Solomon Islands. Their candidate has narrowly survived the election. And even though he didn't manage a clear win, Sogavare didn't exactly lose the election either. Sogavare leads the Ownership, Unity and Responsibility Party, shortened as the Our Party. It has emerged as the single largest party after the polls. It won 15 of the country's 50 parliamentary seats, well short of the 26 needed for a majority. But more than the competition. The major opposition coalition won just 12 seats. Everyone else was in single digits, which means Sogavare is the closest to forming a government, provided he can cobble together his own coalition. And this brings us to a prominent factor in the politics of the Solomon Islands. Independent candidates. 11 independents won during these elections. That means 11 seats are up for grabs. These independents will be wooed and cajoled by the bigger parties. Any of them could become a kingmaker or maybe even a king. After all, Sogavare won his last prime ministership that way. He was an independent who was chosen to become the prime minister. Only after that did he form the OUR party. So don't be surprised if something similar happens again, but it's still a long shot. Sogavare doesn't seem keen on giving up power. He has announced that he still runs the security apparatus of the island nation. Sogavare says that until a successor is chosen, he is very much in charge. He has the power of the government behind him. He also has China's backing. Horse trading is common in the Solomon Islands, which means Sogavare might just return. But even if he does, his position has been weakened. The people of the Solomon Islands have shown that they are wary of him and by extension, wary of China.